Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome into a new episode of Capitol View, a weekly webcast brought to you by the Daily Journal and djournal.com. I'm your host, Brad Locke, joined as always by Capitol Bureau Chief Bobby Harrison down there in Jackson, coming to you every Monday afternoon talking state legislature, of course, right smack in the middle of this 2017 session. I guess actually kind of getting closer to the end, though, aren't we now, Bobby?
Well, we're over halfway, and we're down to we know what the issues are. There's all the wannabe issues have been culled out, and now we're down to a handful of main issues that would dominate the rest of the session. It's supposed to end in late March, so I guess we're over halfway.
Well, yeah, like you said, we know what the big issues are. A lot of bills still in play, of course. The one that is not apparently in play. Let's start with that, Bobby. The bill that would limit the powers of the Attorney General, who is currently Jim Hood, to file lawsuits on behalf of the state. Of course, Jim Hood has recouped a lot of money over the years from various lawsuits, mostly against corporations and the like. Not everybody is happy about his ability to do that, especially by his use of outside counsel. And he says that's due to understaffing, so he's having to hire some outside attorneys to help with that litigation. But a bill that was going to limit that power, Bobby, it's pretty much dead now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is dead, Brad. Technically, it could be brought back up by tomorrow, but the Senate Judiciary Chairman Todd Tindall says that bill. I'm sorry, Sean Tindall says that bill is dead. That he won't try to bring it back up tomorrow, which is a deadline. And the bill would have required the Attorney General to get permission from a panel that consisted of the governor, lieutenant governor, and secretary of state before he could file lawsuits on behalf of the state when he was hiring outside counsel. And so the ironic thing about this whole process is we're dealing with revenue shortfalls right now, and it wasn't for all those lawsuits and literally tens of millions of dollars the Attorney General has brought into the state, the budget would be in a mess. But that he'll be able to continue to file those lawsuits, and there's some big ones pending, including one against Entergy, the electric supplier down here in central Mississippi. Supplies a lot of the state's electricity, and he has a lawsuit pending against them that could be impacted by this legislation.
Is a lot of this opposition to his current level of power kind of, Republicans tend to be friendly with corporations and such. Is it kind of stem from that?
Yeah, the author of the bill, Mark Baker, and Republican House member from Rankin County, he says the Attorney General has been able to make policy through the lawsuits he's filed, and that he said that's the prerogative of the legislature to make policy, and one person shouldn't be able to do that. If the bill had passed, it would have set up a court challenge. Hood has maintained, and there's some previous court cases that would tend to back him up to at least to an extent. That is, the Attorney General, he has the sole authority in deciding who to sue on behalf of the state, and this lawsuit would be infringing on that constitutional authority. So that way, it would have been. I'm sure there would have been a lot of litigation had the bill passed, and there's been landmark lawsuits filed on by the Attorney General using outside counsel. The biggest one, of course, was the tobacco lawsuit back in the 90s. That's literally brought in more than $4 billion to the state coffers, and it's still bringing in money today. A significant portion of the Medicaid budget is funded through the tobacco lawsuit that was filed by previous Attorney General Mike Moore back in the 1990s.
Well, as you mentioned, Bobby, Tuesday is a key deadline for bills to remain alive. One of those being the internet tax bill, which of course would force online retailers to collect the 7% use tax, as it's technically called, on online purchases made by Mississippians. Of course, Amazon recently voluntarily started collecting that tax, and this bill, if it gets passed and becomes law, Bobby, would that money ostensibly would go toward helping the infrastructure needs in the state, roads and bridges. Of course, many of them are substandard right now. So what's the prospects for that legislation at this moment?
Well, I think prospects may be a little dim, Brad. Joy Fillingane, the Senate Finance Chair, kind of has indicated that he's not enamored by that bill. and it may not come out of his committee tomorrow. Tomorrow is the deadline for general bills to come out of the committee in the House where they did not originate. So if the bill doesn't come out of the Finance Committee tomorrow, it's dead for all practical purposes. And Fillingham argues that the current law already gives the state the authority to collect this 7% use tax. There's a Supreme Court ruling that has stopped the state from collecting it to a large extent. And Fillingham says that the Department of Revenue is now working through that court lawsuit to get the retailers to voluntarily pay the tax. Amazon, as you mentioned, is a prime example of that. That's the biggest online retailer. And so he says this bill is not needed, but others argue the bill is needed because it puts more pressure on the retailers to collect the tax and remit it to the state. And importantly, also, the bill sends the money to, as you mentioned, to road and bridge improvements, not only on the state level but also on the local level.
Yeah.
If this bill is not in, if this bill doesn't become law, whatever tax is collected through, it would go just to the state general fund to be divvied up for a number of purposes. The local governments would not get any of it, and none of it would be set aside for road and bridge work.
Yeah, and obviously this is one of the pressing issues in the state is the infrastructure and with all these roads and bridges that need work and maintenance. And I know the Mississippi Economic Council did a study recently kind of trying to figure out, okay, how much money do they need? And basically to get everything where it needs to be, to fund all the needs, it would be like $6.6 billion. And of course, they had a plan to have about, I think, what was it, $375 million a year dedicated toward it. And they didn't get that. So, I mean, yeah. What other hope is there if this one doesn't, if this bill doesn't pass?
Well, there's the internet sales tax bill. The estimate is it'll bring in anywhere between 75 and 125 million per year, short of the 375 million, obviously, but still would be would make a big difference. And also, there's a bond bill alive that would provide 50 million to local governments, to the cities and the counties for local bridge needs through the sale of bonds to finance those construction projects over a 20-year period. Would be 50 million, which also is far short of what they need, but would be at least a step in the right direction. So the two things that are live are the bond bill and the internet sales tax. Now, the internet sales tax, there's a good chance it's going to die. I'm not certain, but it appears to me there's at least a good chance it would die tomorrow. The bond bill would then be the only option alive to help with the road and bridge needs in the state, and it would be dedicated solely to road and bridge needs on the local level, not on the state level. And the MEC and other groups say the needs are both on the state and local level.
Yeah, surely. So we'll keep an eye on that one and see where that goes as well. Let's talk about some other bills that are currently alive. These having to do with the amount of power the governor has, in particular to do with the personnel board. And Bobby, I know we've got a couple bills that passed a key hurdle Friday, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, the personnel board, which is the Mississippi's version of the civil service protection, which protects a state employee for being fired for political reasons. There's a bill that faces tomorrow's deadline that if the bill passes, it would remove civil service protection for most state agencies for 3 or 4 years, 3 years, I think, Brad. And that bill faces the deadline of tomorrow. I think there's a good chance that bill is going to pass. And then the other bill that's alive that would greatly expand the governor's power is a bill that would it passed a Senate committee Friday. It was a Senate committee that had killed the bill earlier this session, Senate version. But on Friday, this committee passed this House version of the bill, which would there's about over 60 boards across the state, what they call professional licensing boards, and they regulate everything from architects to accountants to veterinarians to acupuncturists to cosmetologists. And these are boards that are governed by people in those professions. And the bill would essentially give the governor the oversight of these boards and commissions. And it passed Friday, but it passed with a caveat that they're not certain they want to give the governor this authority, but they want to keep the bill alive for right now to see if there's some compromise to be found so these professional organizations would have some more oversight, but not necessarily from just one individual. So we'll see where that goes in the process. It's alive, but it's far from certain it's going to pass this session.
Yeah, John Polk, he's the chairman for the Senate Accountability, Efficiency, and Transparency Committee. He said some significant changes would need to be made to the bill first, right?
Right. I don't think it's going to pass in its current form, where the governor, it's sort of the governor has all this power within his office. We'll see. This bill is coming about because of a U.S. Supreme Court ruling in North Carolina where they had these similar boards.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court ruling said that the board members could be subject of lawsuits if it was found that they were putting in practices, regulations that sort of fended off their competition. So it might make it easier for Mississippi accountants to the current Mississippi accountants to get business and keep outside accounts inside of the state. I guess that would be an example of how it could limit competition.
This bill this may be a little bit of too much inside baseball, but it has a reverse repealer aspect to it.
Yeah.
What is that? I had not heard of that.
Dummy bills. We talked about dummy bills this year, Brad, and we talked about reverse repillers. And essentially, what they did is put in a section where the bill is set to go into effect, say for July 1st, 2017, and then they add another clause that says the bill is set to expire on June 30th, 2017. So so in essence, it would never it would never go into effect. So they put that in there just to safeguard it. They want to keep it alive and study the issue and see if they can find that common ground I was talking about earlier. But they want to make sure the bill doesn't pass until that common ground is found.
All right, well, let's wrap up the show now, Bobby, with the three things from the past week, because we do this every week, looking at and most impactful lawmaker for the past week, most impactful legislation, and the strangest thing to happen down there at the state capitol. Bobby, let's start with the most impactful legislator.
Well, I mentioned Sean Tindell. He's a Judiciary Aide Chair from Biloxi in the Senate. He's in his second term, and last week with the Attorney General's bill we talked about earlier, that shows. I mean, I thought that was just a good example of the power of a committee chair, especially a chair of a major committee like Judd A. I mean, he went into the meeting last week, and he made it clear that he wanted the bill not to pass. He even went to the additional step to actually bring the bill up for consideration. A committee chair can just kill the bill by just not bringing it up, but he brought it up. But he recognized a member who he knew was opposed to that bill and said, you asked her, she had a motion. He said the motion was to table the bill. And he recognized her to make that motion. And he made it clear that he supported that motion, and the bill died or was tabled without any real debate even. So I just thought that showed the power of a committee chair and how he used that power. So Sean Tindell, Republican from Gulfport.
All right. Most impactful piece of legislation.
Well, mainly because we didn't talk about it, but another bill that sort of affects Northeast Mississippi that's alive and faces tomorrow's deadline is the bill to consolidate the school districts in Chickasaw, Oklahoma. I mean, perhaps Chickasaw and Houston, and perhaps Oklahoma. That bill is in the House, and we're going to see if there's a lot of opposition to that consolidation, but we'll see if it goes far tomorrow. If it's passed the House with the consolidation of the Houston and Chickasaw school districts, but not Oklahoma. The House has talked about wanting to consolidate all three districts, including Oklahoma, in that consolidation. So we'll just see what happens with that tomorrow.
And finally, it's never boring down there in the state capitol. Bobby, what's the strangest thing you saw this past week? Well,
it was kind of funny. And, they can read bills, Brad, to sort of slow the process down, or to when they're mad about something, legislators might have bills read just as a show of their dislike for some rulings or some things that happened in the legislative process. And that's, the Republicans are in power. They have, what they call supermajorities in both chambers. So it's been Democrats who've had bills read this term. But for the first time this term, a Republican had bills read last week. Brad, Gary Staples, longtime House member from my home county, Jones. He was upset that some of his legislation was killed, so he was having the bills read, and so I'm sure that made Speaker Philip Gunn happy. Not really that a member of his caucus was having bills read. He was upset that a bill that would tax carbon dioxide extraction, CO2.
Yeah.
He wanted to tax that, and because he said it was being used by Texas companies and was a Mississippi Mississippi product that should be taxed, a natural resource, and it was going to Texas, and we were just losing it and not getting anything for it. And he wants to tax that, and the bill died in the Ways and Means Committee, and he was very upset about that. So he was having bills read, and of course it was even when it was a Republican having the bills read, Brad, people would be happy to know that it was a demon chipmunk that was reading the bills.
Oh, the demon chipmunk.
Yeah.
It's not going away anytime soon, I guess.
Speed you couldn't understand.
Exactly. Well, that does it for this episode of Capitol View. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. If you missed the part of it or just want to watch it again, you can catch the replay here at djournal.com. Again, coming to you every Monday around 2 o'clock. A little bit later start today. Had a technical issue that we had to resolve first. You can follow Bobby on Twitter at BobbyHarrison9. Of course, read all of his work in the Daily Journal and at djournal.com. So that's it for this episode of Capitol View. We'll see y'all next Monday. Until then, have a good week.
Thanks, Brad.